Good evening, Houdat Nation, and happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. Happy, very, very eventful Wednesday, to our Bayou Blitz family. Well, listen, we all knew that the Saints off season was going to be nothing if not eventful. And I think that it's safe to say that with the Saints have not disappointed thus far. Less than 2 weeks into the 2024 off season, and we'll get into all that news, all that speculation, and what comes next, and more. With me, Bob Rose, one of your co-hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast, being joined by the brains and the look and the brawn. I don't know what I bring to the table, but welcome, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, my friend?
That's the nicest thing anybody's told me today. I appreciate it, Bob. I don't know about that. The brains, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I barely got through college, and sometimes I make sense on here, sometimes I don't. Um but no, it's good. It's cold, as it is in a lot of places here in the US. So hopefully you guys are safe and staying warm,
Yeah.
depending on where you guys are with the weather, snow in certain parts of the country as well. So I hope everybody's safe and warm. You guys can make your Brendan's cold jokes. I'll just do this, as some of you have throughout the year. Um, it was eventful for the Saints this week. We knew some of these things there. Thanks, Bob. I don't feel left out. Bob, I mean, in all honesty, like, it is a lot colder where you are than it is here, but um we knew that there were things that were on the horizon for the New Orleans Saints. Certain moves. We didn't know to what degree. We didn't know who was going to be out, who was in, who was out. It was a toss up. But the one thing we knew was Dennis Allen was staying head coach. Bob and I, for you guys that are here and the people that have tuned in throughout the regular season, you guys know Bob and I have been telling you that was not really a question. Even going into the last two games of the year, where you had some reports where it was like, well, like, his job is safe, quote unquote, for now. I think that was a Rappaport report. Um,
Report.
yeah, we didn't have any doubt that he'd be back. When it comes to Pete and the other offensive coaches that the Saints lost, does it come as a surprise to me? No, because the offense was extremely underwhelming, disappointing this season. However, it's one of those things very similar to when Sean Payton left, very similar to situations where even like a Bill Belichick, and I'm not saying in terms of um, the accolades and the legacy that they leave, but in terms of a guy being in one place for a really long
Mhm.
time, you just never think it's going to end. And though I knew Carmichael was on his last legs, I figured, and Bob, you and I had talked about this, that he would be promoted into a senior offensive assistant role or something like that. That's not the case. They just flat out let him go after 18 years in New Orleans. Bob, I think you did Carmichael some justice this week. You wrote an article talking about his achievements in New Orleans, and while towards the end there, the Saints' offense was as efficient as a three-legged shopping cart. Um, Carmichael's time wasn't all bad. And frankly, for a good, I'd say, three quarters or more of it, Carmichael in the Saints offense was really, really good.
Mhm.
And you could point towards Drew Brees and say, well, Drew's the reason for that. You could point towards Sean and say, well, Sean's offensive genius mind is a part of that. Well, I would think it would be unfair to not throw, Pete Carmichael into that recipe too, and say the
Mhm.
three of them together really made something special. And like I said, Bob, I think you did him and his time in New Orleans some justice, because this is a business where it is, what have you done for me lately? And frankly, the Saints offense had not done much lately, but I think he should be remembered well, especially during those prime Drew Brees years in New Orleans.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote the article. And listen, this is a move that needed to be made. Frankly, it was one of many moves that should have been made. But we have all off season to talk about those. Pete Carmichael with the Saints franchise for 18 years, as you mentioned, 15 of those as the offensive coordinator, at least in title. Which and I tried to study as thoroughly as I could, and I couldn't find anything to dispute this. That Pete Carmichael, to my knowledge, is the longest tenured coordinator, offensive or defensive, with one team in NFL history. That's a hell of an achievement. And for the people that wanted to comment negatively on that article, just because they hate Pete Carmichael for being Pete Carmichael, yeah. Obviously, he's proven himself to be an ineffective play caller. He has proven that when he is the chief controller of an offense, that things just didn't work right. Things just didn't fire as the way they should have fired. But what Sean Payton's offense has done without Drew Brees? What did Drew Brees do before teaming up with Sean Payton? This was a team effort. The Saints offense was between 2006 and 2019 is when I first started to notice a significant downslide to this offense. And it was a team effort. Yes, obviously Drew Brees was the catalyst. Sean Payton was the chief architect, but Pete Carmichael, Brady, Lombardi, Dan Campbell, they all had very effective roles. When this entire team of game planners and brain trust was together, and you will not find a more proficient offense between 2006 and really 2017, 2018, 2019, and a few years there, 2009, 2010, 2011 come to mind specifically, where it's the best passing offense in NFL history, best all-around offense in NFL history. Pete Carmichael was a part of that, and the man deserves his credit for that. Obviously, when he was asked to do take on different responsibilities, increase responsibilities, and increase role, that didn't work out very well for anybody involved. That was acknowledged in the article too, and that's why Pete no longer has a job with the New Orleans Saints. But someday Pete Carmichael will be enshrined into the Saints Hall of Fame, and in my opinion, he richly deserves that honor every bit as much as the other names that I mentioned.
I'm glad you brought up that time period, 2009, 2010, 2011, and you and I have talked on here and in private about 2011 as a season as a whole, and people forget that was a Carmichael year in terms of play calling controls.
For a lot of it, yeah.
For a lot of it, and the following year when things started to go downhill, obviously 2012 and Peyton being suspended and whatnot, but Carmichael was a big part of keeping the glue of that team together. And did the Saints in 13 had a good year, and then 14, 15, 16, we know how that story goes, but you're absolutely right. Like, this is a guy that is so much a part of the New Orleans Saints winning DNA. And while, like I said, it didn't end particularly well, especially the last 3 or 4 years, I hope he's fondly remembered for the teams that trotted out there and were the most entertaining offense in football for a half decade or more, give or take. And Carmichael's DNA and fingerprints are all over that. That was not the surprising one to us, Bob. When you talk about some of the moves that were made this week, for me, the two that surprised me, losing Thomas to the Giants was a little bit of a surprise. Now the Saints rushing numbers were not very good this year. But Thomas was a guy who had been a part of the Saints organization for a while, very well respected amongst his peers. But I think the big one, and I think you'd agree with me here, was letting go of a young offensive mind that you and I both liked in Cody Burns. And were receivers really the issue this year? Maybe. Was it the lack of depth at receiver this year? I think so. But that was a guy that, remember, when we were talking about Carmichael's position and whether or not he'd be brought back a year ago, Cody Burns' name came up as a potential candidate. Cody Burns was spoken about in some circles as a guy that the Saints felt that they could groom for that position. And all of a sudden, he's no longer on the Saints staff. Bob, before I ask you this question, and I do want to get to saying hello to people in the chat. Anna, hello. Jerry, Eric, always driving. Be careful, especially going to Colorado. I'll be out there next week.
Oh.
Slade, DJ. Make sure I get everybody. Hey, and John Butler joining us here right as I was about to wrap up, saying hello to everybody. So hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. As always, drop your questions there in the chat. We will get to them as they come in. But Bob, Burns, like a big surprise to me. I think a surprise to you. Do you feel like it was a smart move, and why do you think the move happened?
Well, when I saw the move that they were terminating the contract of Cody Burns, at that point I figured, okay, they're just going to clean house of the entire offensive staff. And I find it the most surprising to me is the fact that that's not happened. The most surprising individual to me is the fact that Doug Marrone, as of 9/18 Eastern Standard Time, is still employed with the New Orleans Saints. Cody, along with obviously Carmichael, Cody Burns, and senior assistant Bob Bicknell have been the only three coaches terminated by the New Orleans Saints, along with running backs coach Joel Thomas, as you said, leaving to accept an identical position with the New York Giants. Now, we found it interesting that Joel was given permission, since it was a lateral move. The Giants had to seek permission to interview Joel Thomas, and the Saints immediately granted it. And they did that on Monday. So it was then that we all knew that something was coming down the pike. As far as offensive coaches being on the move out the door. But again, the most surprising to me, I'm with you, and I agree with you. I like Cody Burns. I was kind of hoping they'd retain him and Ronald Curry. Curry is still, as of 9/19 now Eastern Standard Time, Ronald Curry is still with the New Orleans Saints. And Curry and probably Marrone are going to be granted official interviews for the offensive coordinator position. Whether they get it or not, and I know a lot of people are rooting for Ronald Curry. I wish him well. But Brendan, I look at it this way. If you had a problem with the way the Saints offense ran last year, and I think most of us did, even with that late surge at the end, particularly by the passing attack, then why on earth would you want to promote anybody from that particular staff? Now, every individual is different. Every individual has different philosophies. I will certainly grant that. But if you're going to move on from Pete Carmichael, and as I said, that was a move that needed to happen, and you're going to end the New Orleans career of Cody Burns after just 2 short years, plus let a highly respected coach like Joel Thomas leave the building. To me, that's you telling me that you're acknowledging that the entire offense was a problem, including the entire staff. So I don't know why you wouldn't make a clean sweep of the entire coaching staff at this point, especially assuming that they do hire from outside, and we'll get into the scheduled interviews in a minute that they have lined up so far. If you do hire from the outside, that person is going to want to, and in my opinion, has 100% right to pick his entire new staff. So I know as an incoming coach, I certainly wouldn't want to accept a position where I'm being told, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is your wide receiver coach. This is your offensive line coach. Good luck this year, coach.
I've only seen a handful of situations across sports where that's been the case, where, and a lot of times it comes down to money and it comes down to salaries.
Mm-hmm.
To where a guy comes in and it goes, hey, we got 1 year left on Billy Joe's contract, so you're just stuck with Billy Joe being your wide receivers coach this year, or whatever assistant role they have. And guess what, guys? This is going to come as a huge surprise to all of you. That is a major turnoff in the interviewing process. That you're told, hey, for next year, these are your guys. You know, you can bring in your quarterback coach, your running back coach, but you got to have our receivers coach, and you got to have our senior offensive assistant, and you got to have our offensive line coach. But you can bring in this guy, this guy, this guy. That's tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's unattractive. That would be unattractive to me, because it's one of those cases where it's almost, hey, I don't trust you entirely with the keys.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you trusted me entirely with driving the Lamborghini, Ferrari, Rolls Royce, whatever, you just hand me the keys.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that you're told, well, here are the keys, but you got to have one of my guys in the passenger seat anytime you take the car out.
Right.
Then you don't feel like you have freedom to do what you want and really change the blueprint and the DNA of this offense. And
again, if an offensive coordinator hire comes from outside of the organization, they may very well come in and say, I want to keep Doug Marrone as my offensive line coach. I want to keep Ronald Curry as my as my quarterback coach, and what have you. But again, that in that scenario, that's their decision to do so.
Right, you have to give them the opportunity. You can't tell them this is what it's going to be. You can say, hey, if you want these guys, they're here. If you'd rather bring in your own guys, we're going to let them go, because we're 100% behind you, whoever the offensive coordinator is. So to your point, yeah, why would you hire within if it's been such a disaster as of late? One. And two, you don't want to turn people away from this job, because frankly, I don't think it's the most I don't look at this as a situation where you're going to have a lot of people that are like, oh man, like the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator job is like the job to get, right? But you're going to have interest in it, right? You have a former Pro Bowl quarterback. You have a multi-time Pro Bowler at running back. You have an up-and-coming receiver in Chris Olave. Like, you have some weapons to play with there, but I don't see it being like the job of the offseason. So when you don't have something that's like the job of the offseason, why would you want anybody to look at that and be like, well, that's not an attractive position because they want me to keep these assistants?
Yeah, and that segues perfectly, into a couple articles that we, as the Saints News Network, wrote this evening, this afternoon through this evening. The Saints already have 3 names lined up where they have requested permission to interview these candidates, and 2 of the 3 in particular are under the radar names, young coaches, and that has a certain faction of the fan base up in arms. Why are they interviewing guys they never heard of? That we never heard of. Well, first of all, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from having success, and secondly, to your point, to a lot of big name, maybe an Eric Bieniemy, for example, if you're talking names. Maybe this isn't an attractive job to him. To John Gruden. Yeah, to John Gruden, who wants to be another head coach, by the way. To John Gruden, maybe this isn't an attractive job to him. I mean, we don't know. We've not heard that. But I certainly like the fact that they're going, that at least early on in this process, that they're eyeing up young position coaches, to step up. because that shows a lot of aggression. And young coaches are typically aggressive when they immediately get a promotion. So I like that. And having said that, the three names that the Saints have are seeking permission to interview yet, or so far, are Dan Pitcher, the quarterbacks coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, and Zach Robinson, the quarterbacks coach for the Los Angeles Rams.
The one thing that I hate, like absolutely hate, in the process of hiring new assistants, new coordinators, new head coaches, is the interview process, because it is overreaction central.
Oh, yeah.
To your point, well, I've never heard of this guy. And guess what? Every coach in the league at one point, nobody had ever heard of. And there's a reason that they're requesting to speak with these particular people, right? They're on the radar. They've impressed. We don't know what happens in these like league circles. And, when you go to the combines and you go to, the owners meetings and what have you, some of these guys are really highly regarded despite not being an offensive coordinator, despite not having head coaching experience, despite not having whatever. So let the process play out and we'll see what comes of it. And if you're really curious about who these people are, Google them.
I got an idea. We wrote 3 articles about them. Read them.
Whoa. That is an idea. Who would have thunk it? Wow. Let's get to some questions, Bob, before we go into some of Mickey Loomis's comments from his media presser today. Bob's laughing. Guys, you guys better be tuned in for the next 30 minutes or so if Bob is laughing, because it's not quite the evil, like angry Bob laugh, but it is the laugh of I'm about to rant Bob. So this is going to be fun. But let's start with some questions. John Butler asks, do you guys think the improvement of the offensive line as the season progressed is why Marrone is still here? Or do you think that a move is still coming? My personal opinion, there's a lot of respect around the league. Hence, see the conversation I was just having with you guys for Doug Marrone. There has been for a long time. Yes, the line got a little bit better as the year went on. Poquito. Not a lot. But there was a little bit of improvement. I think he's so well respected that it's one of those situations where he will be around. And to Bob's point as well, whoever they bring in as an offensive coordinator, it may be one of those like, hey, you have a guy who was an offensive coordinator, very respected in the league. We just want him here for you to lean on if you need him. Right? It is almost one of those like senior advisory roles, but he's really well respected. And we'll get into some of Mickey's comments, but Mickey had comments about some of the particular offensive linemen and having plans for them and their development. So, if Marrone has a hand in that and you really want to develop these guys a certain way, you don't want to make a change at that particular spot. That's why I think Marrone's still here. Bob, you may have different thoughts.
John, I thought for sure, and I said this with Alan Ulrich last night, that last night at this time, I felt for sure that Marrone, the announcement of the parting of ways with Marrone would come either today or tomorrow. That was before Mickey Loomis's press conference, which we'll get into in a minute. Now I'm not so sure. But I can see an upside to keeping Marrone on the staff, at least initially. You have a young guy, coach-wise, a young guy in Jari Evans, who we all felt pretty strongly that Doug Marrone was mentoring to take a higher position within the coaching staff at some point. Jari's role up to this point, up to his, through his, young 2-year career as a coach, has been mostly working, individual work, while Marone oversees, of course, the entire offensive line. And I do think the moderate improvement in the line probably staved off the Wolves for Doug for a little bit. Not to mention the fact, as Brendan pointed out, he is one of the most respected, offensive line coaches, if not offensive coaches in general throughout the NFL. So, you currently have, as it sits right now, still some experience. And the fact that they are, going out and interviewing, two guys who have never, two of the three guys who have never been an offensive coordinator yet, one guy in his early 40s and another guy in his mid or late 40s, again, young guys, as far as coaching life goes. To have an experienced guy available like Doug Marone, if the new hire chooses to retain him, I think is a pretty strong statement, and that could be why, from a strategy standpoint, why a guy like Doug Marone has not been terminated from his position yet, to make him relatively untouchable to other teams at this stage.
We're gonna stick with some potential changes. Slade has questions regarding Kai Harley and Jeff Ireland both being interviewed by different teams for different positions. Harley having an interview later this week in my neck of the woods in Charlotte
Mhm.
with the Carolina Panthers for their GM opening, and the Chargers interviewed Jeff Ireland, or will be interviewing Jeff Ireland. Two mainstays to the New Orleans Saints front office. Um, Listen, we knew Harley was going to be getting some attention. Um, the the idea that he was going to be retained in his position, we knew was not an idea that was going to come to fruition. He would have to be promoted, which would have meant what? That would have meant Mickey would have had to be promoted, and there was some rumors flying around about that, but Mickey shut those down today
Mhm.
as well. Uh, Bob, this is an interesting spot because the Saints aren't in a total rebuild quite yet.
Right.
But you could be looking at a complete overhaul of the offensive coaching staff and some of the front office if you lose both these guys. So your reactions to that and early in the process, but if you were to give a percentage odds that these guys are on the move, what would it be at?
50-50, maybe worse, because I know both guys, both Jeff Ireland and Kai Harley, are extremely highly regarded throughout the NFL for different reasons. I mean, Jeff Ireland is outstanding at player personnel, and running a scouting department. And we've seen that especially in his first few drafts with the New Orleans Saints, 2016, 2017 to be precise. And some of the middle round picks that he has made since then. Kai Hartley, everybody wants to, the national media, likes to pat Mickey Loomis on the back for, salary cap wizardry. And while Loomis does deserve his fair share of the credit, just as much, if not more credit goes to Kai. He's the numbers guy in that front office. And, frankly, I think, if the Saints were to lose both Jeff Ireland and Kai Hartley, it would be absolutely devastating. If they were to lose one, I think it's easier to replace a Jeff Ireland than it is a Kai Hartley, because finding a numbers guy on the football side is tough. Finding a football guy in the game of professional football, you would think would be a heck of a lot easier. Plus, again, Jeff oversees the entire scouting department. A department that he himself put together upon his arrival in New Orleans in 2016. So again, if you like the culture that Jeff Ireland has set up on that side of the operations, then you would think that you should be able to promote within relatively confidently. Again, replacing Kai Hartley, in my opinion, would be a much more difficult task.
I'll ask you about this, and we'll move on to Mickey's comments because we got two in our chat that I think are somewhat important to touch on. The first is an easy one, and that is that Marquez Callaway has signed a futures deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a guy who was on his second stint in New Orleans doesn't appear to be making a reappearance for that second stint. So you might have to be looking at stint number 3 if Callaway were to come back. No major news in that, but DJ says, is Gruden coming? I think it's an interesting talking point. And I guess this is a good segue into some of Mickey's comments as well, because he was asked directly about John Gruden and said that he didn't want to talk about names of potential candidates, which is a very, it's not quite coach speak because you're not talking about coach, but kind of in that alley of political correctness, I guess, when addressing the media of saying, I don't really want to talk about it. It's the nice way of saying, we're not talking about that right now. We're going to talk so much about this leading up to, and if it actually happens. I think at the end of the day, when we've talked about this from a football standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, right? He's familiar with Dennis Allen. He's familiar with Derek Carr. He was in the building over the offseason. So from a football sense, it makes sense. From a larger and broader scheme of everything, I don't think it makes logical sense when you are trying to rebuild something that has been underwhelming at best over the last few years, to bring in a guy that, while a great offensive mind, a guy who's currently suing the league, a guy that is under fire for things that were done, said, whether it was in person, whether it was through email, whether it was through text message. Not a good dude. Not a good look. And it's not even not a good look. It is, you showed your true colors. You done got caught. And I don't know if that's the best thing for a team that, like I said, isn't in a total rebuild, but is in a little bit of an identity crisis right now. And losing key members of their DNA and the fingerprints and the blueprint of this team over the last 15, 20 years is going and getting John Gruden the smartest thing to do from the grand scheme of things. And we've said this before, right? We haven't said it yet this offseason. You ready, Bob? On paper, in Madden, John Gruden makes a lot of sense because of the familiarity, his success with Derek Carr, XYZ. Great football mind, great offensive mind, winning coach, winning cultures. That all makes sense. But from a morality standpoint and from all of the media standpoint, guys like us, does it make a lot of sense to bring him in at all? No, it does not. I think it would be one of the worst things to do for a team that's in an identity crisis. Winning football games, sure. Everything outside of that, I think it gets a little touchy.
Yeah, I mean, from a PR standpoint, it's an absolute nightmare. Because I think we said it last week. When I called John Gruden a despicable human being, and I stand by that. And you also can't bring a John Gruden in right now until you know what you want John Gruden to do, because John Gruden's not going to come in as a traditional offensive coordinator, and that's the end of the story right there. You have to figure out what you want to do with your offensive coaching staff, including the offensive coordinator spot. And my hunch is that if you bring in someone like Gruden, it's going to be as a senior offensive assistant or something like that. Maybe he's still in charge of the play calling. Maybe he's still in charge of the whole damn offense. But you have to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of that coaching staff. Secondly, well, really, thirdly, since I already mentioned the despicable human being part, thirdly, you have a coach that, okay, we're not being told that Dennis Allen is on the hot seat, but he sure as hell should be. What kind of message is that sending to your players about Dennis Allen if you bring in a John Gruden? Now, me personally, I wouldn't mind the move from that standpoint because, again, if you get off to a piss poor start next year and you want to make a move and get Dennis Allen out of here, like you should have done this offseason, frankly. But if you want to make a move early or midway through next season, you have an experienced winning coach on your staff if you bring in a John Gruden. But again, if you do that right now, what kind of message is that sending through the organization about Dennis Allen? It's if you're backing Dennis Allen, whether we agree with it or not is irrelevant. If you, the New Orleans Saints front office, are backing Dennis Allen, I think it's a mistake to make a move like that. But again, whether you do or not look to bring a John Gruden in, you have to figure out what you want to do, what kind of identity you want for the rest of your offensive coaching staff. And folks, that's going to take a while to play out. A couple candidates I want to see them interview. Clint Kubiak, who's my two favorites are Clint Kubiak and Zach Robinson for this job right now. But Clint Kubiak, Anthony Lynn, both offensive assistants for the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers ain't done playing yet, and they can't interview coaches from here on out. I think the week between the conference championship and the Super Bowl, I think they might still be allowed. But again, that's a couple weeks away. You're probably not going to make a decision on your offensive coordinator until after the Senior Bowl, which is a lot of unofficial job interviews going on that entire week, in Alabama leading up to the Senior Bowl game. So, that's what, a little over a month away. This still has a long process to play out. So they're not going to be hiring John Gruden or anybody else officially for at least a month, maybe longer.
Would have been really funny if our phones dinged right as you said they're not hiring.
Right.
Yeah. Worse things have happened, but you're right. And my final thought on Gruden is to your point, you have to clearly define that role. But second, it's not one of those. We use the term bridge quarterback. That would not be a bridge offensive coordinator.
No.
Or a bridge offensive mind. Like, you would be committing at least the next 3 years to John Gruden. I don't see a situation where that ends well. Now, this is also coming from guys that work in the media and not guys that work in a locker room or with the team. That's a hard sell. That is a really hard sell to a fan base. Let's see. From the app formerly known as Twitter, is Ronald Curry gone if he's not the offensive coordinator? I think that's an interesting question. Like, if he doesn't get interviewed for that job, is he gone? I wouldn't say it's an 100% thing. Kind of what Bob and I were talking about earlier with the whole, when they go through these interviews with guys for the offensive coordinator job, it's going to be one of those, either you're stuck with these guys as your assistants for the rest of the year, or they're here if you want them. If not, kick them out. Show them the door. So I guess we'll see. Also coming from the app formerly known as Twitter, can we bring back Morstead as punter? as nice of a story as that would be, I don't think that's happening
Yeah,
either.
it ain't gonna happen.
I appreciate his consistent love for New Orleans, though, regardless of where he's gone afterwards. That's been very nice to see. Will they keep Winston? No,
No.
no, easy.
He's a free agent anyway, so it's not like they're going to cut him. But I would be absolutely shocked if Jameis Winston were re-signed by the New Orleans Saints.
I would too. I think Jameis would be shocked if he
I-
got a
right.
contract offer from the New Orleans Saints. Let's move into Mickey's comments with the last like 15 minutes of this today. Some of them were out there. Out there, I think is the nicest way I could put it. I want to start with the one that I thought was the most out there. The one that some of you on X or Facebook or whatever social media platform you guys chose to use called it gaslighting, which was interesting. Interesting take. But I definitely thought it was out there, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, Bob. Actually, I can tell you, I know I don't agree with this comment. So let me read it verbatim. This was the Saints general manager, Mickey Loomis, on keeping head coach Dennis Allen. Quote, Chuck Noll, his first 3 years, went 1-13, 5-9, 6-8. They recognized he's a good football coach. Bill Belichick, his first 3 years, 6-10, 7-9, 7-9. Tom Landry, 0-11, 4-9, 5-8, 4-10, 5-8. He gave us 5 years of Tom Landry.
Mhm.
All of them Hall of Fame coaches. It's the easy thing is to blame them. You gotta look beyond that. I think anytime in any sport you compare someone to Hall of Famers, you're putting yourself in water right out the gate, dangerous water. It's one thing to do that with guys that you see have the potential of being future Hall of Famers,
Mhm.
right? Very easy to do. Like, I don't know. It might not be the greatest example in the world, but like Mahomes isn't a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame right now. But for us to compare him to other Hall of Fame quarterbacks, okay. If we were doing that with Mahomes 2 or 3 years ago, okay, I can see it. That's fine. For me to get up on this table and say Jake Haener is going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback would make me look dumb, make me look like an idiot. Dude's never taken an NFL snap. I see this comparison being more towards the latter than the prior. My issue with it isn't so much taking data, right? You're very much analyzing and going, okay, you have 3 years, 2 years of Dennis Allen, right? Full seasons of Dennis Allen. We've upped our win total, missed the playoffs. We had a winning season this year. Let's go back and find other coaches that had poor years that are very well known. That's fine. You can do that. The issue I have, one, is the name dropping of Hall of Fame coaches. Right? It is one thing to sit there and go, you know what? Dennis has improved from first season to second season. There's a lot of coaches in their time with teams that were less patient than we were. And there's been times where there's teams that have been more patient and reaped the benefits of that have had a worse first 2 seasons. That's a much better statement than the statement that Mickey Loomis just made today. Because that makes it sound like you are so tied to this head coach that you have this love is blind is the expression, right? That you're so in love with the prospect of Dennis Allen as your head coach that you're going to completely ignore everything that has gone wrong. I'm not just talking about on the football field. I'm talking about the culture, questions that Mickey Loomis also just addressed. Are we just going to push those all to the side and go, nope, Dennis Allen's going to be a Hall of Fame head coach? It was a little bit of an idiotic statement. Plain and simple.
It was an idiotic statement that should earn Mickey Loomis a drug test immediately. And I like Mickey. I always have. When I love defiant Mickey too, and we've seen that throughout Loomis's career. But there's a difference between being defiant and being utterly moronic, and that was an utterly moronic statement. I get that you want to back your head coach. I especially get that you want to back your head coach despite the court of public opinion wanting to literally noose all of you. But I mean, and Brendan and I talked about this before we came on the air. When Dennis Allen was officially hired to succeed Sean Payton, I wrote several articles and made several statements comparing Allen's situation to that of Pete Carroll, Mike Shanahan, and Bill Belichick. Those were three coaches that failed somewhat miserably in their first stints as coaches and bounced back with authority. You're talking Bill Belichick, shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. Pete Carroll, probably Hall of Fame. Mike Shanahan, decent chance for the Hall of Fame. And I wasn't necessarily saying Dennis Allen was going to be a Hall of Famer in his second stint as a head coach, but I was citing those examples saying, okay, this is a different Dennis Allen. So we thought. It wasn't. This is a different Dennis Allen, more mature Dennis Allen, better team, better organization, better run organization. And now you look 2 years later, and can you honestly say, any of you, can you honestly say that the New Orleans Saints are a better football team than what they were last year? I know the record is better, but look at, go to the highlight reel in your mind and really think to yourself, is this a better product? Were we witnessing a better product in 2023 than 2022? My opinion is, if it is a better product, it is only minimally so, and it's certainly not enough for me to hitch my wagon, my job security, and Loomis's job security is just fine, folks. But for anybody else to hitch my job security, to Dennis Allen, and then you go out and compare him to Landry, Noel, Bill Walsh. Am I missing one, or is those the three?
They didn't say Bill Walsh. That's what threw me off.
He did right at the end. He added Walsh in
at the
like
end
a sentence or two later. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you have Belichick, Tom Landry, Chuck Noll.
Okay. The difference between all those guys is and Dennis Allen is this: you were seeing marked improvement. Tom Landry and Chuck Noll were literally building dynasties from scratch, putting it together with the draft alone, and doing so with a bunch of high picks. And they were taking their lumps. Terry Bradshaw comes to mind. Roger Staubach having to serve a Navy duty, and not even being available to the Cowboys for 3 or 4 years. Randy White, Harvey Martin, Joe Green, L.C. Greenwood, Mel Blount, those guys, Steelers, Cowboys, Hall of Famers, littered with Hall of Famers. But that's just it. You had Hall of Famers that you were building with a young core that was steadily improving. Bill Belichick had to basically overhaul an aging roster, and change the culture in New England, because Pete Carroll, in 2 years, almost irreversibly damaged the winning culture that Bill Parcells had set down. Sound familiar? Sean Payton, Dennis Allen. I'm just saying. But that's the big difference. While the Saints have a lot of good young pieces, I don't think any of us can sit here and say we're excited about the young core of this football team. They're just taking their lumps and they're growing. No, this is an old football team that are trying to solve a lot of their problems with quick fixes, that aren't working, frankly. That's the big on the field difference. And again, you were noticing a gradual change in culture with Landry's Cowboys, with Noel's Steelers, with Walsh's 49ers. I'm a little bit too young to remember the early days of Chuck Noll and Tom Landry. I am not too young to remember the early days of Bill Walsh. When a rookie quarterback named Joe Montana was taking his lumps early on, along with another young core of the San Francisco 49ers. So again, complete apples and oranges between those situations and Dennis Allen and these Saints. Could Dennis Allen wind up being a Hall of Fame coach? I mean, as long as he's still employed, I suppose it's possible. But again, that just Mickey Loomis, that doesn't pass my eye test. And you just set my ears on fire with what you said.
Well, to your point, if there was young talent on this team, probably feel a little different. If the Saints were, as you said, taking the lumps with a rookie quarterback or a much younger offensive line, or even, as much as I love, and this is no disrespect to Demario Davis, even if they had a young defensive signal caller, right, I would feel a lot different. But this is an old football team, one of the oldest football teams in the league, going off of just average age. So no, completely different situations. Let's talk about some of the other things Mickey said today. There was a couple little ones, like if the Saints would have made the playoffs, like Lattimore and Thomas could have played, little things like that. But I think the big ones for me was obviously what we just talked about. But he also made a comment, Bob, about wanting to get on, essentially saying, I've gotten too comfortable and I want to make this situation like a little bit more uncomfortable. I think self-awareness is good in any job. And being able to look in the mirror and admit I've gotten a little bit too comfortable and that's my own fault is a good thing. But you don't take that and then drastically say, I want to make myself uncomfortable. That's like, you got to make gradual baby steps, right? I've gotten a little comfortable. What can I do tomorrow, right? Some of you know this quote, some of you don't. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, even though he didn't work out as an NFL quarterback. And that was what Tim Tebow used to say, was every day it was just about being 1% better than you were yesterday, right? When you get too comfortable in a job, that's what you do. How do I get a little bit less comfortable every day? How do I put myself in different situations to challenge myself just a little bit every day? Not just go from one end to like the polar opposite. And also, what does that mean? What does it mean you want to be in like an uncomfortable state? Or he wants to make things uncomfortable. Like, uncomfortable for who? Like, for you, for the team, for your
Right.
employees, like for the coaches, for the players. Like, who are we making uncomfortable here? And how are we doing that?
He's not. Mickey Loomis looked right into the cameras with that statement and effing lied. Because if you want to make things uncomfortable for yourself, and by uncomfortable, I took it to mean put himself on edge, put everybody else on edge, get back that competitive edge that you've clearly been missing the last 2 or 3 years. You say that, and yet you stick with Dennis Allen as your coach. That's literally the most comfortable thing that you could do, is not change the guy at the top that's going to win or lose you football games. Because the scariest thing, and every human being feels this way, the scariest thing is the unknown. And you step into the unknown by bringing in a new coach, by and in doing so, completely severing ties with the Sean Payton era, an era of the most successful football, by far the most successful football in New Orleans Saints franchise history. Now we know that whatever ties are left from the Sean Payton era, are frayed and very thin. Demario, Cam, a handful of players, Dennis Allen, maybe a couple of Ronald Curry, Doug Marrone. That's about it, along with Loomis himself. So, literally to make things uncomfortable for you, on edge, fear of the unknown, would be to make those moves and just start with a clean slate. He didn't do that. So, Mickey Loomis, you lied to me and the rest of your team's fan base again.
And last one for me. We could go on and on about this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it next week as well, as other things kind of roll in. The one thing that really, to me, is telling, when you hear it straight from a general manager, is where the Saints are in the progression of Trevor Penning. And to hear Mickey say that, well, like, they like Trevor Penning, they still have faith in Trevor Penning, but they have to do a better job of supporting Trevor Penning, making sure he's put in the best positions to be successful, like things like that. That tells me one of two things, Bob. It tells me, one, you have no idea what's going on in the locker room. Like, zero. If you're making those generic statements, because they're generic, they're not very well thought out. And it's like asking ChatGPT to answer the question for you, giving an AI like no information whatsoever about anything.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, if it's not that you're that unknowledgeable about what's going on in your own locker room and with your coaches and your development coaches and whatnot, if that's not the case, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Because then you're admitting to the failing of developing players, and you're admitting that you've let these guys down by not being them. Verbatim, what he said, not being there for them, not supporting them enough, and not putting them in positions to be successful.
And oh, by the way, you've kept the same coaches across the board that are responsible for that failure in development.
Yeah, just saying.
Silly me and my logic, I know.
I know. When we start making sense on this, Bob, when we start making sense on the podcast, there's an issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, sir.
See, John Butler says Mickey was making me uncomfortable with all the gum chewing. Hey man, it could have been nicotine gum. You never know. That guy might have been really, really stressed out.
Yeah, that didn't bother me as much as it did most.
Let's see. What is Mickey Loomis's approval rating within the state? That's a good question, right? Especially after that. I think going into that, it probably wasn't as bad as people thought. Like, Mickey's one of those guys, like, pretty good standing with the fan base, has been pretty transparent over the years. But anytime you're in a situation where, like, it wasn't as, I don't think the state of the Saints was as bad as like the dog meme with like the flames that says everything is fine. Like, I don't think it was that bad. But when you have a fan base that, I'd say 80% of the fan base, if not more, pretty pissed off right now, right? You don't want to say riots, you don't want to say anything like that, but when you've used the analogy of when you have
the mob at the castle gate.
The mob at the castle gate. You've used that analogy before. So when you have that going on, or you have a dumpster fire, the worst thing you can do is throw gasoline on it, and that's kind of what Mickey did.
Mm-hmm.
I think he made more people upset than he did really answering questions. So as someone who, this kind of breaks my heart to say, 'cause it means I'm getting older too. I'm not I'm not about the same age as a lot of these like young prospects anymore. I'm kind of at that like I should be in my athletic prime, and well, here I am in my athletic prime, guys. Look at me, new year, new me. But in all actuality, like I'm still in my 20s, right? And so if I put myself in the position of Trevor Penning, who's what, 23, 24 years old, um, and I just had my boss's boss's boss, like I had the top guy say that we haven't supported you enough and we haven't put you in the best position to be successful. Do you know what my response would be? Well, then, like, what the hell have we been doing for the last 2 years? Like, what are we doing? Like, if you are openly admitting to the public, to people, that you have essentially let me down, what are we doing here?
Yep.
So it's either that bad, guys, or Mickey just doesn't really know what's going on between coaches, culture, all those things. And culture, too. We haven't really dove into all those comments. We did a little bit. But my lord, like the fact that even had to happen, where's the state of this culture? I think tells you how out of check you are with everything as
Yeah.
well. And that's a concern. John Butler said, I don't want to hear Brendan talking about being old. I said I was feeling old. That's different, right? Like when Bob and I first started covering the draft, like I was a year or two within age of a lot of these like 4-year college guys. And now it's not so much the case anymore. So you're starting to feel like, oh, wait a minute. The older I get, like the more years that I do this show with Bob, the further away I get from being the same age as these draft picks. That's all I meant by that.
Meanwhile, I'm calling. I could still technically call a 34 and 35-year-old Cam Jordan and Demario Davis. Those are good kids. Those are nice kids. I like them.
Now you sound old as hell as someone who should like have like little circular glasses like this, and you should be walking to the library every day and checking out your new books and going, oh, I really like those kids that just checked out the books there. Those good old whippersnappers, like, come on, Bob, you're not that old. Not yet. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah.
I can't wait till we do this show long enough to where Bob's broadcasting from a nursing home. That's gonna be awesome.
All right. Goals. We got goals now.
But anyway, is Mickey really that out of touch with everything, or is it really just saying how bad the Saints development team has been over the last couple of years, or is it a mix of both? Because let's face it, like since 2017, and I know that it like 17 and 06 are like the golden draft classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They always will be. And it is an unrealistic standard to expect those type of draft classes all the time. But as Saints media and Saints fans, because they've done it twice in the course of a decade, essentially, or 2 decades, you expect them to do it again. But really, the development of players since 17 hasn't been very good, like since that draft class. So is it a mix of both, or is Mickey really that out of touch with everything?
I'll go option C. I will call it delusional stubbornness. I don't think Mickey Loomis is willing to admit publicly to these issues, willing to acknowledge these issues, either vocally or through his actions, and again, or lack of actions. Because just like with Dennis Allen all year long, we heard the same thing year in and year out, year in and year out. I don't know why any of us expected to hear anything different from Mickey Loomis at the State of the Saints press conference. Because the actions tell me you kept Dennis Allen. You are using Pete Carmichael. You are scapegoating Pete Carmichael. And again, that's a move that had to be made. But for Pete Carmichael to be the only scapegoat out of this, I think is mildly ridiculous. You are shushing and doing the hush gag on players like Michael Thomas and other players who have the nerve to speak out, whether cryptically or just flat out do it, against, Dennis. You have chosen sides, which is the worst thing that you could do And when you're dealing with any sports team, particularly a professional one, you have chosen sides, and the side that you have chosen is Dennis Allen, for better or for worse. And Mickey Loomis, he had, if you're comparing this to the Titanic, and I have recently, uh, Mickey Loomis, because of his standing with the Benson family, he has his spot reserved in the lifeboat. Pete Carmichael has already been tossed off of the wayside of the ship. And now this is this feels to me like a floundering vessel, with Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis in charge, and Mickey's going to be like Bruce Ismay, look him up, for you non-history buffs. Bruce Ismay was the designer of the Titanic, or the president of the White Star Lines, who owned the Titanic, and kind of snuck off when no one was looking and got into a lifeboat and got off the boat safely. It feels like Mickey Loomis is Bruce Ismay in this situation. And again, this stubborn, delusional stubbornness. This boat won't sink. Well, y'all are taking on a lot of water, and you're not at the bottom of the ocean yet, or bottom of the Gulf, since we're talking about the Gulf Coast region. You're not at the bottom of the Gulf yet, but man, it doesn't look good. Like I said, I see a general manager that has very clearly, and we're talking black and white clear, very clearly taken sides, and that's the worst thing that you could do. This feels like a mess.
I'm glad you said word sides, and I think we're going to use that as a teaser for next week. But sides, I think that's the best way I've heard anybody put it over the last, 2 weeks since the culture press conference to now. Sides have been taken. Players are not happy about it. Some have been more vocal than others. And it does very much, and we talked about this last week, it very much seems like this is the way. It's this way or the highway. You pick out what you want. Sides have been taken. It's going to be really interesting to see the response from the players, not just this offseason, but going into next year, and who's here and who's not. And the funny thing about all this is we live in a world, in an age where every single one of us has like one of these in our pockets, right? So with that, what happens, Bob? These aren't the days of like the 80s and 90s where you had to wait for somebody to write a book or do a newspaper interview or a TV interview for some of this stuff to come out. One of these players or somebody is going to leak out what some of the internal conversations here were. This guy Godwin's ACL from X. That is, you read my mind.
Oh, he's a good one. Godwin's ACL. He and I have had several conversations over the couple years.
So he said, should we host Hard Knocks? I was about to say, it's either going to come out through players or it's going to come out through HBO. And I think it would be a terrible thing for the Saints. But in terms of entertainment value and seeing all of the dysfunction going down there right now, I think it would be perfect. He also
I'll tell you the next shoe to drop. You're going to see players this offseason, as early as this offseason, jettisoned, released, traded for pennies on the dollar, that didn't fall into line. And while that situation in and of itself isn't unusual, I mean, we saw Sean Payton run a lot of players off, because they weren't going to fit into his culture, or didn't fit into his culture when he first got here. Bill Parcells was infamous for doing that. Mike Tomlin did it in Pittsburgh. That in and of itself is not unusual. But again, when you're running players off that can, by the way, still contribute. I'm not talking about over the hill guys that are getting paid too much and stuff like that, or guys that are underachieving due to their contract. I'm talking about guys that are going to make us all go, I didn't see that coming. This makes no sense. This guy had a good year or was progressing nicely. I can't make sense behind it. because we're not going to be able to make sense about it, because it was a move that was prompted by something that happened behind the scenes, either something that was said or done, against Dennis Allen and the establishment, the guy who they have hitched their wagon to, the players that do not immediately fall into line. There's already, I guarantee you, and I don't have names yet, although I have a couple that I suspect. There are going to be players that make us all go, why did they make that move? It's because they weren't, I don't even know the words I want to use. They weren't down with the delusional stubbornness that is going on in the Mickey Loomis, Dennis Allen regime. I now feel comfortable enough to call it that.
They weren't comfortable because they saw the cracks in the foundation, and after they were told to duct tape the cracks in the foundation, they said, "Nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't want anything to. I'm not going down with this." Um, and some of you may say that's a new age of thinking, right? It's people from my generation that are saying, "No, I don't want to put up with this," or and you're seeing that a lot more in, I'll call it the real world job market, where people are leaving jobs or saying, "Well, I'm not going to stay here because of this."
Sure.
People are doing it at the NFL level too. And here's
Yeah.
the thing: is when you have a skill set where you're going to easily be able to find another job or find another team, you don't got to put up with it. You just
Yeah.
say, trade me. And I know that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. People just wrote out their contracts. But we live in a completely different NFL and a completely different world now. And I guarantee you, whether it becomes made public or not, you're going to have a handful of guys that get released, cut, waived, traded. That it's not because the Saints wanted to do that. It's because the guys came in and said, "Hey, Mickey, hey, DA, I'm not down with this. So get me out of here." Or I'm not reporting, or get me out of here, or whatever the case may be. There's going to be a handful of players. I'm not saying a lot, handful meaning like 5 players maybe, that probably end up going that route. And that's a good way to tease this and end tonight's show going into next week. Because as Bob and I said, it's just going to be a quiet, boring off season for the New Orleans Saints. What are we going to talk about all off season long? But with that said, Bob, a lot of articles came out from the Saints News Network this week. We got profiles on guys that are being interviewed for this offensive coordinator role. We have some reaction and analysis of what Mickey Loomis has been saying. We've got articles about some of these offensive coaches that have been fired and potentially some other firings that could be on the horizon. So, Bob, where can people follow you, your good work, and your stuff with the Saints News Network?
Yeah, folks, and thank you for those of you who have read those pieces, and please continue to do so. And eventually, John Hendricks, myself, Ross Jackson, Kyle Mosley, will get around to doing the yearly recaps that we usually do, position by position and specific players. So bear with us. The coaching news is coming fast and furious, but we will be on top of it and continue to be on top of it. So continue to follow us all at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, and the SI.com New Orleans Saints team page. I also post all of my own articles on my personal social media platforms. Bob Rose on Facebook, at Bobby R 2613 on Twitter, and obviously through the Bayou Blitz Facebook page and Bayou Blitz Twitter page as well, at Bayou Blitz Pod. So continue. Thank you for those of you that are following those 2 pages. And if you aren't, please do so. If you are and know others, other Saints fans, send them over our direction. Our numbers have kind of plateaued. We'd like to hit a spike, especially coming into the off season, where we not only have coaching news, but we're going to have draft profiles, mock drafts, things like that. We want to get this Bayou Blitz Facebook page rolling again, and as formidable as it was just a few short months ago.
And for myself, you can follow me on virtually everything at BT Boylan. Continue to grow the Bayou Blitz. I know it's hard in the off season, guys. I know it's hard to sit there and get super psyched and want to be, spreading stuff on social media, whether it's good or bad, on the New Orleans Saints, especially while there's playoff football still going on. But like Bob said, we'd like to hit a certain number before we start doing some exclusive stuff for you guys. Hopefully we can hit that number. Bob and I will be back next Wednesday, same time, same place. We thank all of you for tuning in this evening. All of our regulars, thanks so much for hanging out with us. I know that there are some questions we didn't get to. We'll get to them. You guys just keep asking them. I promise we'll get to them. Hey, there's a lot to talk about, and sometimes I wish this show was longer, because there are days like today where we could have been on here for a long time. But until next week, guys, you stay safe, stay warm, and find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you next week for the Bayou Blitz.